Lewis, if you have one more question.
Yes, I have one more question for both debaters. What would have to happen for you to reverse your view on the existence of God? Mr. D'Souza first, please.
I think that a question that every believer has to face is, can you envision circumstances in which you would become an atheist? And I certainly can. In fact, in some senses, the process has already happened to me once. When I was in college, I imported to Dartmouth Christian beliefs. I was hit with a bunch of different questions. How can are you telling me you believe someone was born of a virgin, walked on the ocean, brought dead people back to life? Are you nuts? We're living in the 20th century, now the 21st century. And don't you believe science operates according to invariant laws? Or, how do you know your religion is true? If you were born in Saudi Arabia, wouldn't you be a Muslim? Now, my point is, I wanted to believe, but my brain was getting in the way. And so, as a result, I did what a lot of Christians will do in that circumstances. Our allegiance ultimately is to truth. It's not that we believe just because it consoles us when we want to believe. Ultimately, our fidelity is to truth. And so it was that fidelity imbibed in the atmosphere of critical learning that pulled me away from religion. Now, it is that same atmosphere of critical questioning that caused me to turn, you might say, my skeptical mind onto skepticism itself, to realize that there are hidden metaphysical assumptions buried underneath atheism which are rarely acknowledged. That once you acknowledge them, the debate becomes seen in a completely new light. So I, in a sense, rediscovered in later life a Christianity that seemed to me more reasonable, make more sense of the world, and not suffer from the kind of narrow-mindedness. See, in some ways, every believer can envision what it's like to be an atheist. Every believer is an atheist with regard to other religions. In some senses, though, the problem I think atheists have is, it is for them, in a sense, they cannot take account of genuine belief. The vast majority of people in the world are believers, and the atheists have got to say, you people are seeing UFOs. You people are suffering from delusions. What? 95% of people on the planet are so stupid that they are suffering from universal delusions on a daily basis? Let's have a little more respect for human intelligence, and let's have a little more respect for human experience. This is the kind of dogmatic atheism that drives me nuts.
All right, thank you, Mr. D'Souza. Mr. Barker, same question.
Well, I will actually answer the question. Atheism is falsifiable. I don't think theism is falsifiable in principle. If Jesus were to materialize here on this stage out of thin air, and we caught it on videotape, and you all testified to it, and if he were to give us the exact geographic coordinates in the Holy Land where the Ark of the Covenant is buried, 14.5 feet underground, and we were to go to that spot and dig up the tablets on which the Ten Commandments were actually written, if that were to happen, then I would change my mind. I would say, wow, that I was wrong. If the Bible says, all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer believing, you shall receive. So ask God to give you a prophecy. For example, if God were to tell you that tomorrow at 2:30, a meteorite from the northeast coming down at 85 degrees angle would puncture this building, would go right through this podium and end 12.5 feet below the basement, composed of 70% iron, composed of what 20% nickel and 3% iridium and so on. And if that actually happened, as your God supposedly was able to do, I would change my mind and I would say, Dinesh, you were right. We could all think of a number of things that would falsify atheism. I would happily change my mind if you would give me evidence, like if you would prove to me that Jesus was telling the truth when he said, all things whatsoever you ask in prayer believing, you shall receive. The prayer of faith will heal the sick. The Bible is very clear about those things. So it's perfectly falsifiable, and that's what makes atheism stronger. The failure to falsify a statement is what actually strengthens the truth claims of a statement. So far, we haven't heard anything that would even in principle falsify Dinesh's claim that a God exists.
All right, thank you. Well, there'll be no responses to this. Each debater will now have the opportunity to ask the other one a question. Mr. D'Souza, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Now, in the question, can I cross-examine him a little bit?
No, just one question, please. No follow-ups.
All right. Let me put it this way. I'm going to answer his question and frame it in the form of a question. The Bible makes a rather startling statement, which in fact flies in the face of all empirical evidence. The universe had a beginning. Not only the universe had a beginning, but a God who is outside of space and time created not only the universe, but space and time. Space and time had a beginning, an astounding thought, because no matter how far back you go in time, you can always think about the day before, the year before. Today, if you go into an introductory physics class at Harvard, you will learn as a direct consequence of the Big Bang that, in fact, the universe did have a beginning. And equally startling, not only did all of matter have a beginning, space and time also had a beginning. So in some senses, this is something rather remarkable. Modern science has 2,000 years later come to agree with a bunch of relatively moderately educated fellows who said 2,000 years ago, not based on science, based upon God told me, that this universe of ours had a beginning. So here's my question to Dan Barker. Not the vindication of God, but rather this. Where did the universe come from? If all things that have a beginning, if all material objects that have a beginning must have a cause, what is the cause for which the universe is the effect?
Thank you, Mr. D'Souza. I'd like to also remind the debaters that a question is a short, inquisitive statement with a question mark at the end. Mr. Barker, you have 2 minutes. Sorry.
We know that space and time came into existence at the beginning of the universe, and that the words that you just used, the word where and cause, those are spatial temporal words. Those are concepts that can only function within space-time. So asking what is the beginning of time is a meaningless question. It's like asking, what is the beginning of the earth? You could say, if you go up to the latitudes up to 0, you get to the North Pole. What is north of the North Pole? That's a meaningless question. To ask what happened before time is a meaningless question. To ask what is the cause of something outside of the space-time dimension in which causality is even possible is a meaningless question. To ask what caused cause is a meaningless question. Again, you're mixing logical spheres here. How can a being exist outside of time? A being, by definition, occupies space and time. That's what a being is. It seems to me you're equivocating again. It's like Bill Clinton, what's the definition of is, To exist means to exist within space and time. Time is not a thing that you can be outside of. Time is a dimension. Where does it start? Where does it end? How do you know you're outside? I guess I would reply with a question to you. If God is outside of time, I don't know how that's even possible. I can't even picture it, but you're asserting that that's possible. Then is time outside of God? And then if there is no temporality in the mind of this God who's outside of time, how do we determine what causality is? Causality is determined by temporal succession. This happened first, this happened later. God didn't create the universe and say, oh, look, what happened? I guess I better decide to do it now. The mind of God has to function in a temporal, causal way if he's going to be a being in any meaningful sense of the word. So your question is meaningless. It's sort of a parlor game trick. And there are a lot of unanswered questions in science, but to simply plug some of those gaps with your God is irresponsible. You're jumping prematurely to your pet religion conclusion.
Thank you. Mr. D'Souza, are you clear on the question, I believe? Mr. Barker was asking? Sure.
I certainly am.
You have 2 minutes.